Hi, welcome to the lecture on Chapter 12, Project Procurement Management. This is where you get to buy things, or at least decide who your outside vendors are going to be, if that is so, what your project needs. So we're going to look at understanding, of course, the importance of project procurement management, especially a lot of projects are going outsourcing, whether both on offshore programming or vendors supplying equipment. So we're going to describe what it's involved in planning procurement for projects, determining what kind of contract, preparing a plan to manage procurement, creating statements of work, what decisions am I going to use to choose a source, make or buy. That's part of the process. Is do I make it? Do I buy it? Then we'll talk about how to conduct procurements, what strategies for selling, responses, selecting sellers, awarding contracts, of course, controlling this whole process, and then what happens at the process when we close the deal, so to speak. And what types of software could be out there that could help you do this. Now, procurement is basically acquiring goods or services from an outside source. So that means I'm going to an outside company to do something that you've decided is not necessary or you don't have the skills to do. In most cases, I'm buying something because I don't have the resources, human resources, to develop ourselves, and it's just cheaper to do it on the outside. Now, experts predict that the spending for software and services is going to be just unbelievable. As far as 2014 was at $3.8 trillion, and we still debate, and probably will forever, whether offshore outsourcing helps or not. Both your country, your employment, your project. There are so many different aspects of it we'll be arguing for probably forever. Now, we know recently we've tried to bring IT jobs back to the U.S. Of course, they've come up with terms urban onshoring. But it basically still means I'm outsourcing it, but I'm not sourcing it to a foreign country. I'm outsourcing it to local talent. And there are some cities out there that are trying to develop infrastructures and resources in low-income areas to kind of help drive this out. Now, of course, the debates, like I said, have been ongoing. Walmart prefers no outsourcing, while GM went from 90% outsourcing to only 10%. So it pulled back. Sometimes getting cheaper help someplace else isn't always, in the long run, the cheapest. Project management expense and headaches. We've talked about how difficult it is to manage outside resources. The temporary work forces continue to grow. Temp jobs, tons of it out there. Now, as companies are transferring more work abroad, especially IT infrastructure, I can get a data center any place. All I need is what? I can go get a data center someplace else and then just dial in. I don't care. I just need an IP address, right? So having that infrastructure someplace else, you're seeing a lot of countries, India, China, Philippines are preferred. Latin America is growing in popularity. A lot of it is what? Shortage of qualified people. We need smart people here doing jobs, and when we can't manufacture them enough or create people that want to do this type of job, there are other parts of the world that do and have built up their country to want to supply that service. So it'll be an ongoing issue for a lot of years, I think. Now, some of the things that we do right is, Zulily develops all their software in-house to meet their need. Proprietary algorithms to track customers. They believe, to build technology, you got to do it from scratch to fit your market perfectly. Buying something off the shelf or trying to make sure your requirements are so specific that someone else can do it, it's difficult. Sometimes you end up starting with buying something off the shelf and then modifying it, and it doesn't always turn out the way you want. But some companies say, I want to design it, build it. So the question is, why would I outsource? Well, I want to get the skills, and I need the skills and technology. But I also want to reduce my costs, both recurring costs and fixed costs. I want to make sure that my organization focuses on what I do best. So if I build widgets, but not necessarily programs to track manufacture widgets, maybe I can get somebody to do the software. And so it allows me to focus on just building widgets and not writing software. It does give me some flexibility because I don't have to do something I'm not good at. And sometimes it increases accountability. I got someone else to blame. Now, let's talk about the process of outsourcing. Well, definitely need a contract between you and the companies doing it. Well, a contract is a mutually binding agreement that obligates seller to provide the specified products and services and obligates the buyer to pay for them. Now, they clarify the responsibilities and sharpen focus. And because contracts are legally binding, there is some accountability for delivering the work. Now, we know tons of things have gone wrong. New York City has mismanaged, IT projects for years. In 2011, Michael Bloomberg, the mayor, improved the oversight. Looking at $700 million price for a system was inflated by fraud, and they wanted their money back. Automated personnel system, tons of delays. Original estimate was $66 million, ended up being $363 million. I got probably a project manager lost their job on that, but because the city paid somebody else to do it, who knows? So then the question is, well, if I have to outsource, how do I manage it? So there are definitely 4 major processes that we go through. You got the planning process. You want to conduct the procurement, the sale. You want to then, of course, you got to control it. And what happens when it's all done? I got to close it. So there's 4 major steps in this process. Now, when do they occur? In most cases, they occur right up front. When you decide to make the project, you have already, once you got your requirements down pat, you're starting to execute what's the process for getting outside resources to do the job. So it starts pretty soon. And then the closing is pretty much based on what you contracted. You could being closing purchases relatively early, maybe from the requirements phase all the way through the system testing and integration phase. So it just depends on what you're contracting for. So let's look at each one of these separately. Now, the planning phase, basically what it needs. I just need to identify what the project needs and who can best meet it. If there's no need to buy any products, then there's no need to perform any procurement. So if you're going to do it all in-house, you have everything placed, this whole phase, procurement phase, can just put a placeholder in it for your next project and never have to do it. But let me just make sure, I thought maybe I skipped past. No, I guess not. But if I needed to decide to pay somebody to do outside services, I need to come up with a contract. Well, there's several different types of contracts. There is a fixed price or a lump sum, which basically says, hey, this is all you get. I'm asking you to do this for $1 million. You're going to do $1 million and deliver it. There may be a cost reimbursement contract. It involves no payment up front, but so I only reimburse for stuff that's spent, time and material. It's a hybrid of the cost reimbursable, what costs did they spend, and, I'm paying you for how much time did you spend, how much material did you buy, and it's probably a lot of consultants do it this way. There's also a unit price contract. It says, hey, I'm going to charge you so much per unit. So if I'm buying widgets, I'm going to charge you so much per widget. A single contract can actually incorporate all four of these based on what yours. Most of the cases I've done, most of my costs have been time and material contracts. There have been times when I'll say, hey, I'm going to let you write this software for $250,000. So much money up front, the remainder at the end. You got some choices. Not anything's right or wrong, but just different ways of how much control do you want to have. Now, point of total assumptions. Basically, this point of total assumptions means it's the cost at which the contractor assumes total responsibility for each and additional contract. So at some point during the contract, hopefully you've written it that they've reached a point of no return, and after that point, they're losing money. Contractors never want to get to this point because it hurts them financially. It just gives you a little bit of formula to do this, but basically, this is from a contractor standpoint, this is their profit and loss stuff. This is where they could pass this point, they're losing money. Of course, if this also means for you, if you get to this point, you're not spending any more money, but you also still don't have your product. So the question is, how hard is it going to be to get that product back when it happens? Now, there's some cost reimbursable contracts. You got cost plus incentive fee. Basically says, hey, I'm going to pay you, a supplier, so for allowable performance costs plus a predetermined fee, and if you get it in early, an incentive. How about a cost plus fixed fee? So I'm going to pay, for performance plus a fixed amount. So I'm going to pay you $100,000 if you get it turned in on time versus a percentage. Then it's cost plus percentage of costs. So it's like, hey, I'm going to, I buy the supplier for the I pay them for the allowable performance cost plus a predetermined percentage based on total cost. All these are different choices. Not any of them are as good or bad. It's just, as a company, you got to decide, or as a project manager, you got to decide which of these are you willing to do. Now, contract incentives can be extremely effective. When the I-35 bridge collapse, when it says, hey, if you can clean this stuff up as quickly as possible, you got $25 of incentive fees on top of the cost, completing the bridge ahead of schedule. So it ended up being very lucrative for the company that's doing it. Because when I'm paying that kind of money out, I says, hey, for every day the bridge is closed, I'm losing money. So if they come in under budget, I can actually save money in the long run. So there are some big things to do it. Now there are different contracts as far as how much risk are you willing to take on, both from a buyer and a seller standpoint. So you're going to be, as you're negotiating this between you, the buyer, and the seller, it's going to say, hey, which of these features, where is my risk factor go here? So it's up to you to pick and choose. And this is the negotiation between your two vendors, which way you're playing this. Now, you can put some contract clauses in there to specify any issues that are unique to your project. Maybe it can require various educational work experience. Maybe there's a termination clause. What happens if, that allows me to end the contract, So make sure, how can I get out of it if things start going wrong? Some of the tools that you can use, for planning this is expert judgment. That's always a great one. But the question is, do you have the experience, or somebody in your project have the experience to make that judgment? Market research, because the biggest thing is, as I'm making the decisions, I've got to make a decision. Am I going to make it or buy it? So general management's got to determine, do I have the resources and the time to make it, or is it just better to buy it? And can I do it cheaper than developing the skills necessary within my own company? A couple examples. Assume you can lease an item for project $800 a day. To purchase cost you, $12,000 plus an operational expense. So then the question is, how long would it take to purchase it to get the same lease cost? So, when you look at, do I want to go out and buy a larger forklift that's only used twice a year versus paying $1,000 a day to rent one? Chose to rent it because it was just, for the two times I needed it, ended up being $2,000, but buying it for, $100,000 plus maintenance take a long time to reimburse that cost. So how do you do this? You just got to make sure you set up an equation. So it's basically, here's your, cost plus $200 a day. So it equals, 800 subtract, so it goes through the math and says, hey, so if you need an item, so they're just going through the math and set up an equation with both options. Both purchases and lease are equal, and then do basic arithmetic to get down to the point, determine how many days it requires. So if you're going to need an item for more than 30 days, then go ahead and buy it. If you only use it 2 days, don't buy it. But then you got to say, okay, procurement management plans is, okay, now I got to, what's the processes that'll be to manage this? And it varies based on what your project requires. A lot of times when I'm putting asking for vendors that I'm thinking about using, I've got to give them a statement of work. I've got to describe what I want them to do. And it's got to be in enough detail that somebody can actually estimate how much work's involved. So it's just basically a scope statement of what work needs to be done. And it just allows somebody to, if I'm going to bid on a contract, it helps me understand what needs to be done. Here's a template, excuse me, of what types of things could be included in one. Some of the documents that you want to use in this procurement process. One is request for proposal. So this is what I'm sending out. I'm soliciting proposals for prospective sellers. And a proposal is just a document prepared by the seller with, when there are different approaches that'll meet my needs. Now, request for quotes. Now, this is where it's like, okay, I'm asking still for somebody to estimate it, but this quote is a statement prepared. I know exactly what I want. I've got a clearly defined item of work that needs to be done, and I just want to know how much it's going to cost me. They can tell me what it's going to cost. Bid, it's like eBay. You know what that item is, and you just want to say, what am I going to bid to acquire it? But if you don't know really the total solution, you want somebody to give me a proposal. How do I create a bridge, or how do I, and you're not sure, you don't have the details how to do it, Then you can send out a proposal asking them to develop more of the answer. Now, request for proposal template. So just lets you go through that. Now the question is, I sent out these requests for quotes, requests for proposals. Now I've got to choose the appropriate party, who's going to win the proposal. So you definitely want to make sure you've got some plan, some criteria for making that evaluation. Because believe me, on paper they all are pretty good sales people, and you could actually have them come back and write a technical presentation as part of it and have evaluated. Decide, when I'm conducting these progressions, I got to decide whom to ask to do the work, send out appropriate documentation, obtain all the proposals and bids. I've got to then evaluate them, select the seller, award the contract. So all of these things come into play. Now, approaches to procurement. Well, I can advertise in several ways. I can approach with a preferred vendor, or approach several potential vendors, or anyone that's interested. If you work for the state, you usually try to find preferred vendors. They've created a list of vendors they only want to do business with. But there are several ways of trying to advertise this. Now, when I can have a bidders conference, so that would be it'd invite them all in, so they all hear what I'm trying to do up front before the RFQ or RFP is sent out. Now, this is an example of a proposal evaluation, and you've got some criteria on one side, given each one of those how important they are, and then each proposal you're giving them a rating. Whether it's 1 to 4, 100, 0 to 100 in a rating, just something to be able that you can mathematically score, because you may have to defend why you gave this proposal to a particular company and prove that it was a fair assessment. So it's very important to make sure you understand what your criteria is and how that criteria is going to be measured, so that if somebody questions you in a court of law, you have all this stuff documented accordingly. Now, of course, the selection process, after you do an initial evaluation of all the proposal, develop a short list. Then I may just say, hey, I'm narrowed it down to the top 3 out of the 10 that I first started with, and then tell them to give me your best and final offer. And then final output, of course, is the contract signed. Now, controlling this process, I want to make sure that all the performance meets contractual obligations. I want to make sure that, because remember, contracts are legal agreements, so it's important to make sure that everyone involved in writing and administering these contracts, so you make sure your lawyer and your accountants and stuff are in the loop as far as what's being done. Project management teams, they got to watch for change orders. You want to make sure that all of a sudden you sign up for the low bid, but all of a sudden they're upscoping you on every little thing because you didn't write your requirements specific enough to change it. So all of a sudden they're changing and the cost of your projects. So that's where you can sell something for $50 million and end up paying $350 million because you didn't manage the construction costs, or you didn't write the change order process, manage that correctly, or didn't write the contract and requirements specific enough that all that was included. Some suggestions. Changes to any part of the project just need to be reviewed the way the original contract was done. Evaluation could impact analysis. So I want to look at the impact of that change. Does it change the scope, time, cost, quality of the materials going to be supplied? All changes need to be documented. Project manager must assign, seal, approve. It can't just be a conversation over the phone or hallway meeting. So you got to make sure that these changes, because they are contracts and there is big money to spend, you want to make sure they're documented and controlled effectively. You want to make sure that your project manager and your team stay close involved with the outside vendor to make sure it is. You want to make sure you got a backup plan if something fails. Is there a second vendor? Is there an alternative solution? Are you building your system on the side, just can't get it up to speed fast enough? So there are tools and techniques out there, such as contract change control system, buyer contract review systems, inspections and audits, so on, to manage that. So you just want to make sure that something's being used to control this. Now, when you're closing, when you're all done, I just want to make sure you got to determine the work was done correctly and satisfactory. You want to update the documentation, records. You want to make sure that you've archived any future reference. If there's a warranty in place, who do I contact? How do I get? How do I play? So just need to make sure all these requirements are included and documented so that you know the process to close the contract, and then what documentation are you going to save. Now, some of the best practices, you got data scientists building predictive models. Of course, why not model the predictive model? Behavioral economists know that people do not act rationally. Crowdsourcing kind of gets people going with, hey, this company's the best one to go through. But we all know that doesn't always play out. So what kind of tools can help us to assist in contract closure? You definitely want to make sure you've got lessons learned in that process. You want to what are the negotiated settlements? Did it all go smoothly? You want to record the management system, that you can easily organize, find, and archive this stuff. Now, some software, definitely word processing. Because you are talking contracts, so you got spreadsheets, Word, database access. There's a lot of different tools out there. There's e-procurement systems out there. Some organizations use other internet tools to find sources, auction goods and services. So just let you know, this gives you a rough idea of the procurement process. Basically, all it is acquiring goods and services that you're not willing to do in-house and you're going to purchase from somebody else. You got to plan them, conduct the process, the procurement, the purchases, control those sales, and then when it's all said and done, close them out. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea on procurement management. And if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.